we're going to talk about briefly why a strong quality culture is important. And I think most people that are listening probably already know the reason for that. What do we mean when we're talking about a strong quality culture? Because if I'm going to manage this process, I need to have objective measures. Otherwise, it starts to become very difficult. And so we need to talk about how would you go about defining in objective terms what a strong quality culture is. And then how do you get there, and what do you get when you get there? And this image here that you see kind of represents the journey, and somebody who's anticipating going on this journey, particularly the decision maker that has a lot of responsibility and needs to be very sure when they make a commitment that they're doing the right thing. And here we see a bridge that looks like it might be going to a really exciting adventure, but is that bridge strong enough to carry us? And that's the question that we have to answer. So when we're in business, one thing that we need to talk about is profitability. If we're not profitable, we are not going to be in business for very long. I don't care how good our product is, we need to make money. And in the FDA compliance world, that means that we have to comply with GMPs. And this is kind of a simple process here. First thing that we have to do, we have to learn GMPs, and we have to, and that's pretty easy, lots of ways to learn GMPs. Then we have to write standard operational procedures, and we have to train our people how to do that. Now that's a lot of work. It's drudgery, but it's fairly straightforward to do it. You put everything into a hopper and turn the crank, and if you work hard enough, you get through it. The difficult part is what comes next. How do you get everybody to comply with those SOPs at virtually 100% level every day, every shift, every batch? Because if you're not virtually perfect, you end up with so many deviations, so many OOSs, that trying to correct all those things can break the bank. And many companies find themselves in that situation. So here we are, where many companies are finding themselves confronted with this third step. So maybe you're in this situation. You've written all the SOPs that you need to write, or at least most of them. You've got your master manufacturing records completed. You've set your specifications. You got all the employees trained. But how do you get 100% compliance? Because that's what you have to be at. Because when you have an error, we all know that an error, or like an out of specification result, costs money. Sure, we see that in our cost reports. Scrap costs money. Rework costs time and money. But really, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Most of the costs are not something that show up in a cost report. And in my years in production management, I saw lots of cost reports. And if we had a problem with a batch, you could easily see some of the cost. If there was scrap or rework associated with it, we could associate it with a particular batch. But what about all the other costs that are associated with a process that is not reliable? And these are costs that are difficult to point to, but they're nevertheless real. So that would be like just in case inventory. It's all that extra inventory that you have to keep around because your supply chain is not reliable. And that's the cost, of course, of the inventory itself, but all the warehouse to store it in, all the inventory. And what happens when we do have a scrap batch or a batch that needs to get reworked? What about that person that's on the phone calling up raw material suppliers to rush in new raw materials? Where does that cost show up on a cost report? And what about the cost of an irate customer who's not getting their delivery on time? And what if we just totally alienate that customer and we have to go out and buy a new customer? How much does that cost? So those costs are very real, but they're difficult to pinpoint. So how do you get everybody to follow GMPs or GLPs 100% of the time? Our processes are complex. One small error can, out of the thousands of things that need to be done right in order to get a batch to be released, one small error can hold things up. And our employees are busy. They're multitasking out there. They're getting pulled in a bunch of different directions, and it makes it kind of difficult to make them focus. I mean, this was my experience when I got into production management. Hey, you give somebody a procedure. The procedure spells everything out. Just follow the steps. And yet they didn't do it. Why didn't you do it right? And of course, they've got a billion excuses. And as a manager, you can drive yourself nuts trying to pin people down on all these different excuses. But we'd like to do a little survey right now and see what you think. And here's the survey question. Are you in a situation where you feel that you have a pretty good set of SOPs in place, but you're struggling to get your employees to comply with your SOPs?
So folks, we'll give you just a minute to fill out this survey. And I'll give you a little heads up when we're going to close it, and then we can see how things turned out. Okay, we'll give another 10 seconds here. And there are results, about half and half.
Yeah, well, kind of a small group here, but yeah, what we find is that most people are struggling with this, and so I think we're good there. Oops. So one thing that contributes to this situation, shall we stop sharing the results?
It should be stopped. I'll try again here. Is it off the screen?
It's still on mine.
Participants, can you type in the chat and let me know if you still see it or not? No, it's gone for the participants.
Okay. So one of the issues that we have in our industry is that most of our managers are technically oriented, and they have to be if you're going to run a plant or a business where you're making dietary supplements. It's going to be a requirement that the people understand the processes from a technical point of view, and they understand how equipment works, how the components work, the technology of mixing them together and packaging them. Everything comes to a screeching halt if the managers are not able to administer that activity. What we typically are not when we're managing these kind of operations, we're typically not charismatic leaders. We're not the kind of people that can stand up in front of a group of human beings and motivate them just by talking to them. And so believe me, I've tried, it didn't work. And so that, you know, there's a few people, 1 in a million people can do that, but not very many, and particularly not many engineers and scientists. So I think that's one thing that we need to admit to ourselves in the beginning. And so we need help. We need some kind of assistance. And one thing that in our experience as consultants in this industry, we see a lot of companies, and the vast majorities of companies are struggling with that third step to get compliance 100% of the time. But there are a few companies out there that are doing a great job. And when you go visit those companies, it's a little bit frustrating as a consultant. You ask the employees, how did you guys get to be so good? And the employees don't seem to know. It's like asking a fish what kind of water they're swimming in. And after doing a lot of thought about this, what we discovered is that these people actually have committed an awful lot of quality compliance as a habit. They're doing it almost without thinking about it. And an example of that would be, and maybe you've got this habit, I know that after years and years in the industry, it's almost difficult for me to sign my name without dating it at the same time. Even when I'm doing completely something that is non-related to regulatory, I automatically put the date in there without thinking about it. So what we're talking about here with positive compliance is something like that. Think about that process on steroids. And that's what you see in these really compliant facilities. People are not rushing around, and yet they're getting things done with amazing speed. How do they do that? What they have is they have a strong quality culture. And here's a definition. It's a definition of strong quality culture. And what it literally says, this comes from one of the quality gurus, Duran. It's in his quality handbook, a culture throughout the organization that continually views quality as a primary goal. It's the pattern, the emotional scenery of human habits, beliefs, commitments, awareness, and behavior concerning quality. Okay, I look at that, and I'll tell you what, as a manager, I'm struggling with that. I don't know what to do with it. If I'm going to manage something, I need objectives, I need measurements. And I really don't have any way to measure employee beliefs, commitments, awareness. Maybe I can measure awareness, I can give them a test, but that really doesn't tell me how aware they are when they're actually have their hands on the work. So from an operational viewpoint, this definition doesn't really do me much good. So what we've done is we've converted this into an operational definition. And that definition includes behaviors and habits. Now, behaviors, that's something I can measure. And if I can measure it, I can improve it. And behaviors, if it's repeated enough, tells you that it's become a habit. So through measurement of behaviors, I can measure habits. So that is our operational definition of quality. What kind of behaviors are we seeing out there? And if we can ingrain that as a habit, then we've got a very powerful tool for compliance. Why are habits so important? Well, it turns out that habits are great because what happens when you internalize a habit is you move that activity from the conscious part of the brain to the unconscious. Now, here we have an image of somebody that bites their fingernails. And I'd be willing to bet that at least half the time this person is biting their fingernails, they're not even aware that they're doing it. And it turns out that according to a renowned psychologist, 40% of the time, we're not even aware of, we're not thinking about what we're doing. And it turns out that willpower or attention is a limited resource. You can only focus your attention on a limited number of things for a limited amount of time. And when we dump all kinds of things onto employees, that attention gets expended very quickly. And what happens in that situation is they fall back on habits. So if you've instituted a change in a procedure, you've trained them on the new procedure. They're out there doing the new procedure, but the minute that stress enters the situation, they fall back on their old habits. And then we have errors creeping into the process. How do you fight that? What do you do about that? And the answer to that question is new habits. And there's kind of a common knowledge that culture is what determines our habits, but in fact, it turns out that habits can determine culture. So if you think about wearing seatbelts, for instance, in the past, we did not have a culture of wearing seatbelts in this country. Now we do. And how did we make that transition? Well, it happened because basically of repetition over and over again. And enforcement was involved in that, but mostly it's just repetition. And we get to the point where, I don't know about you, but if I get in the car, oftentimes I'm not even aware that I've buckled the seatbelt. But I do know one thing: if I turn that ignition on, at least for me, if I'm not buckled in, something makes me feel uncomfortable, and then I do it. So now we have a culture where people wear seatbelts. Now, how do we make that transition? It took decades for seatbelts, and we don't have decades. We've got to do something soon. And we have bad habits. How do we change those habits? How do we do it in a reasonable amount of time? And what's going to motivate our employees to do that? Well, one thing we could do, we could stand over them with a whip and make sure they do it. But it turns out that we don't have time for that. Our managers are already spread thin. And if they use the whip that often, number one, they'll lose their employees, but also, hey, your arm gets tired. So we need to find another way. And the way that works best is to motivate those employees. Now, motivation is something that has been studied in great detail, most especially by Frederick Hertzberg. And he wrote an article in the Harvard, well, he's written many articles, but one that's really good that I highly recommend is from the Harvard Business Review. And what he writes, his research, which is extensive, has found 6 motivators: achievement, recognition, the work itself, responsibility, advancement, and growth. What is it that's motivating this employee to work late at night? And what you'll find 99% of the time is one or more of these 6 motivators here. Now, one thing that you see that's missing from this list, conspicuously missing, is money. And the reason for that is that Hertzberg, in his definition, does not count money as a motivator. Now, why is that? I mean, we know that money is important. And he's not saying it's not important, not at all. But what he's saying is it doesn't fit his definition of a motivator. And his definition of a motivator is something that becomes an internal motor within the employee that just runs. You hear about football players that are said to be a high motor person. That is a highly motivated individual. And that's an internal motor that works inside the employee, and it just runs. It doesn't need fuel, basically. The thing about money is that in his research, what he found is that that money is certainly a powerful influence on the behavior of the employees. The thing about money is if you're going to try to get higher performance from an employee by using money, you have to keep feeding money in. So that does not fit Hertzberg's definition of a motivator, because you have to keep feeding it. And what he says too is that money is although it's not a motivator in his terminology, it can be a powerful demotivator. So if somebody is not getting what they feel to be equitable pay for the work that they do, they can really be turned off. But it turns out that once they have equitable pay, additional money does not motivate them unless you just keep feeding more money in. Well, that could become expensive. But let's take a look at the items that he says really are motivators. And we're going to focus going forward on the top 2 here, achievement and recognition, because we're going to use those 2 to motivate our employees. Okay, how do we do that? Well, first of all, let's take a look at what we're doing now. One of the improvement mechanisms that we have to have in place in our plants and in our facilities is CAPA, or what in the dietary supplement world is called a material review. And in that process, or in our, let's say, a manufacturing process, for instance, we have inputs, we have the process itself, and we have outputs. And if there's an error in the output, then we have to apply corrective action. The problem with that, and we have to do it, it's the law. The problem with that is that oftentimes when an error occurs and we go out and investigate it, the employees that happen to be involved in the process will frequently feel that they're being blamed for the error that occurred. And unless you're really careful, the result of this process can be a blame the operator type of culture. When that happens, the employees become defensive. They tend not to want to talk, and you lose the best source of information about how to improve your process. And that actually demotivates the employees. So this is what exists in most companies. With positive compliance, we add something else. Now, the existing CAPA process or material review process does not go away. We have to do it by law, and you want to do it anyway if an error creeps into the system. But with positive compliance, we involve the employees in making positive changes in the inputs to the process that they have control over, and therefore they feel ownership of that. So, and that reduces the number of errors. They know what's going on at the ground level in a completely different way than the managers do. So, and reducing errors, of course, saves money. So how do we do that? Positive compliance is the way the process works is there's basically two parts to it. The first part is installation of the process. And in this part, the managers are initially trained on the process, and then we train the employees with, and the more the managers are able to participate in that training of the employees so that they are viewed as experts, the better off everybody is. So the administrative parts of the program are set up, and then that's followed by an implementation period that is where the site or the organization receives coaching until everything is running smoothly. So basically two parts there. And positive compliance, we're not going to get into a lot of details on this right now, but it's made up of basically 5 interlocking parts. As you can see here, and they're all equal, they're all important, and the 5 of them work together to make the process work. Management support is critical. And when I say management support, I don't mean management digging in on an everyday basis to handle details in the process. No, what I mean is, and I'll talk about what management support is. And management has to delegate objectives to teams of employees who set up goals to improve the operation within the framework of the company rules. So we have to recognize we are a FDA regulated facility. We don't change anything without going through change control. So the employees have a very specific set of rules that they need to follow if they're going to change things. But the fact that they're working as teams enhances peer-to-peer help, and that helps them to reduce errors. Measurement is a key part of this. We measure our progress as we go forward on a team basis, and that measurement is posted so that everybody can see what's going on. The improvement in the process that is posted is an indication of the achievement that the team is making. And if you remember, one of the prime motivators from Hertzberg is achievement. When people can see positive results from the work they do, they become motivated. And then the other motivator that we talked about from Hertzberg's list is recognition. And this is part of management support. When a team achieves its goal and is successful, management recognizes the achievement of the team. And it turns out that is a very, very powerful motivator. You'd be amazed at what people will do for simple recognition. So the goal, 100% quality work, 100% of the time, rather than correction of errors. Although, like I said, we still, if an error comes in, we still have to correct it, but we're focusing more on doing something positive to prevent those errors from occurring. And the employees then, since they set objectives for improvement, then they can control, and we have to give them a certain amount, calculated amount of control so that they can feel ownership of the process. The outcome of this is that desired behaviors are increased through positive reinforcement and repetition. They become a habit and therefore a part of the culture, and undesirable behaviors are crowded out. And I'll tell you what, it's pretty amazing what habits and muscle memory can do. My brother-in-law, who's a professional pianist, told me one time that a really top-notch concert pianist, when they get going, they're hitting 30 notes per second with that piano. And I can find that hard to believe, but he absolutely insists that that is true. 30 notes per second. That's amazing what muscle memory can do. And it's amazing what people in dietary supplement facilities can do when these behaviors become ingrained as habits. It's amazing what kind of speed can develop in those situations. So how do we do this? The first thing that has to happen is top management. Nothing goes anywhere without top management support. So top management has to buy into this and support it. It doesn't mean that they're out there digging with everybody else on a daily basis. Typically, this process requires about an hour per week per employee, and that includes the managers. You have to develop a rollout plan. No project works well without a plan. You need to figure out what the end state is going to look like. And so that means SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound. We say, okay, what do we want this place to look like when we're at the point we want to be? And then management has to sell that end state to the employees. This can be sometimes difficult for some managers who are used to simply dictating. But the point of this is we want to motivate the employees. So this means management has to communicate with the employees and say, okay, this is where we are right now, but this is where we need to be. And here are the reasons why. This is how, if we embark on this, this is how it's going to benefit you. And the management needs to put that into clear terms for the employees in ways that they can understand. So that might be in terms of job security, maybe bonuses. I don't know. So measurements are the key. And so management needs to figure out metrics for the entire organization. What are we trying to achieve as an organization? and present that to the employees. So the kind of metrics that are typical, and this is certainly not an exclusive list, it's going to depend tremendously on the individual organization. But some of the ones that we suggest, first pass quality yield. What is that? First pass quality yield has got two components to it. One component would be the percentage of batches of product made that meet all of their testing specifications the first time through. And in addition to that, all the paperwork associated with that batch is perfect. In other words, we have none of the situations that you see over here on the right where somebody's left a blank on a batch production record. But it turns out that's pretty hard to do. But it's also, once you achieve it, boy, you can save a lot of money. Some other metrics, percent of CAPAs verified effective. So one of the things that we have to do when we have a material review or a CAPA, we need to verify that our corrective action really worked. And the higher this number, the better. Percent of CAPAs open past target. So typically we put a target date in when we want this CAPA to be closed out. And so this one, we want a low number. So these things really translate into money in the bank, which is the ultimate goal, right? But one thing, and it's true, profit is the ultimate goal. That's why we're in business. But turns out that trying to run a company simply by looking at profit doesn't really work very well. Profit is a trailing indicator. It tells you how you were doing last year or last quarter. Trying to drive a company by simply looking at profitability, it's like driving by looking in the rearview mirror. It really doesn't work. But these other metrics that we talked about here are more concurrent, and it tells you where you are right now, and it's a better way to drive a company. So what is the process? If you're thinking about embarking on this, first thing that has to happen, top management has to accept the challenge. They need to support the operation. So we remember that bridge that I showed you in the beginning. Top management has to accept the challenge to go on an adventure. Then the employees are trained. The employees are divided up into typically the normal teams that they have already. Those teams look at the overall goals of the facility and they develop their own goals to support the overall organization goals. And their progress toward those goals is measured. So they have to measure their activities. And of course, the employees are developing these goals. So we're getting input from the employees. These should be small projects with milestones that are achievable in a limited amount of time, like in weeks, so that they can feel the achievement as they're going forward. And typically these are things like, are people wearing their PPE properly every time? And like one of the teams that we had simply said, well, we noticed that people aren't wearing PPE properly all the time. And so we're simply going to decide to enter the clean room in pairs. And we're going to inspect each other before we go in. And they started measuring the level of compliance with that. And they assigned it to themselves. And they said, once we get 95% compliance with that for several weeks in a row, then we will consider that to be a success. And then at that point, the key thing here, this is where management support is important. Management celebrates success with the employees. And this could be something as simple as management serving a free pizza lunch to this team and being with them when they celebrate. Once they achieve one, rinse and repeat. And you keep doing that until the overall site reaches its goals. So who would be an ideal candidate for this? So one thing we say, your basic quality system needs to be in place. You need to have most of your procedures done, the employees trained, but you feel that you're struggling getting people to high compliance with that. Managers have to be able to delegate a certain amount of control to employees, and some managers can do that. Some managers struggle with that. Typically, a site that does this, or an organization that does it, has got more than 20 employees. Not necessarily true, but typically that, because these problems don't usually show up that much in rather small operations. In a small operation, a top-down management approach can be effective to a certain extent. The problem comes with growth, and a lot of managers do fine until they get into double-digit number of employees. And at that point, a lot of managers have reached their Peter level and are not capable of going beyond that. They need help. Critical thing, management support. And what we say, this is not a get-rich-quick scheme. It takes time, and that needs to be recognized up front. So again, it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. Critical thing really is top management. Top management, there's a lot of managers that have the ability to juggle an amazing number of details, and that works fine as long as the organization is small. But at a certain point, when the organization grows, the managers can drive themselves to drink, handling all the different details if they cannot figure out how to delegate to their employees. And it's not hard to understand why that is a struggle. Imagine yourself in this situation here. You're the manager. You have a precious employee, and you have to have this employee, in order for you and the employee to do their job, you have to let go. If you don't let go, the child is never going to be able to ride the bike by themselves. And so this is the struggle. Does it work? Yes. Answer is it does work. We talked about perfect batch record completion in one organization. It improved from 70% to 90%. In the third year, or in another organization, the first pass quality yield was improved. The number of errors was dropped by 50%. So the answer is yes. So here is a chart of the perfect batch record completion. This is what it looked like over that period of time. This is the real world. Everything doesn't work perfectly. And there were definitely some glitches, but you can see the overall trend. And then the bottom line, does it make money? And the answer is yes, it does. Here is a cumulative cash flow, rough numbers, but inclusive of all costs. It's fully loaded, including the employee's time that was put in. As you can see, it starts out negative because there was an installation cost associated with this. And in the first year, the employee time and total fully loaded benefits meant that this was a fairly large organization. There was, now this was not out-of-pocket cash. This was in employee hours that were spent on it. It was negative, but by the middle of the second year, it was back up to break even. And then after that, positive savings that kept on growing. So it was clearly a financial benefit, but again, not a get-rich-quick scheme. So what are the results? Costs are reduced. Of course, compliance risk is greatly reduced, and that's a cost or a profitability benefit that's almost incalculable. The other thing that it does, it builds leadership at all levels in the organization. Managers learn how to delegate better. The employees take on more peer-to-peer leadership and ownership of the organization. It's amazing how it works. So managers get better, the employees get better too. And this is something that I discovered. The power of recognition, I think, is highly under-recognized in business. This is what happened to me. When I was a plant manager, I was home on a Sunday one time, watching a football game. I get a call from the front gate. Hey, Norm, there's something funny going on here. We got employees that are coming up to the sign at the front gate and they're taking pictures. And I said, well, I don't know, Joe. I agree that's odd, but I don't know that there's any rule against that. He says, well, I don't think so either, but I thought I'd tell you because it's the third one today. So we didn't operate most of the plant on weekends. So these people were coming in from their homes on the off day. Well, I said, well, okay, I'll look at it when I come in on Monday. So I'm driving into the site on Monday morning, and I drive past the sign at the front gate, and I had forgotten that we had put underneath the sign, we had put one of those electronic crawly signs where you can put slogans or information. And one of our teams had chosen as their recognition award that they would have their names on the crawly sign at the front gate, come crawling across. And what they had done is they had come in on their off day with their families. They would stand in front of the sign and wait till their name came crawling across there and take selfies. I couldn't believe it. It was that important to them. So this, of course, costs nothing to do, but it's amazing what people will do for that kind of recognition. So positive compliance allows good administrative managers to achieve great results, even though they're not charismatic leaders. We call it charisma in a can. And that's what I've got today, and I'd like to know what questions you might have.
So as a reminder for everyone, if you have a question or comment, please type it in the chat and we'll allow a minute here for you to do that. All right, well, thank you Norm. This was very helpful. Certainly culture change is one of the most daunting challenges a manager can be presented with. So I think you have a very important, useful approach here. And thank you to everyone for attending this presentation on creating a strong quality culture using positive compliance. If you have any further questions about positive compliance that maybe come up later or that you don't care to share here and how it might be able to help your company, please do send me an email at wood@nsf.org. That's WOOD@nsf.org. And it's up there for you as well. And I will be happy to set up an exploratory call for you with Norm. Finally, don't forget to look for that course survey coming to you soon. And we definitely appreciate your participation today and hope to connect with you later this week at our remaining trainings. Thank you again, everyone.